let's spin it ahead now, because the truth of the matter is, what matters now is what happens next. Oregon got thoroughly dominated by Utah on Saturday night in Salt Lake, 38-7. So the Ducks obviously are going to fall well out of the top four. Alabama got tested by Arkansas. They won by a touchdown thanks to a fabulous game from Bryce Young, and we'll talk about him too. They were nowhere near as impressive as the Buckeyes were. Cincinnati won big. Michigan, as we know, Notre Dame, Oklahoma State, all holding serve. So let's talk about what happens in the CFP rankings. They come out tomorrow. Does Ohio State move to number 2? I mean, because to me, the only reason Alabama was up there is because you needed someone to be up there. You couldn't put Oregon that high because the truth of the matter is they really haven't played that well. Yeah. And you couldn't put Ohio State above Oregon because Oregon beat Ohio State. And so by default, even though I know you would put Cincinnati there, by default, they were putting Alabama there. It seems to me now you have all the leeway in the world to say, you know what, Ohio State's second best team.
Yeah, I think that they basically had this Oregon buffer. And again, I'm glad that they were using the head-to-head result. And they were saying, again, with comparable resumes, we'll use it. We're not consistent on that all the way, but on this point, they were. So that was good because, you know, again, it showed that game was played. We saw it. It mattered. But now that you don't have that buffer, you can compare Ohio State to Alabama directly. And I think you've got to give the edge to the Buckeyes in that situation. I mean, Alabama has coming off two shaky wins. Arkansas, LSU. LSU is no good, and they almost lost that game. Mm-hmm. This is not a vintage Nick Saban Alabama team. And the resumes are going to be different by the time, especially after Ohio State gets through this weekend and then the Big Ten championship game. I mean, they're about to play the 5th best team in the country right now. That's, again, another signature win opportunity. You're going to be able to say that the schedules weren't that comparable and Ohio State greatly improved from its early loss. You can say all of that and make the case for number 2. So I think it's totally fine. It should happen.
Yeah, I agree. There, right now, when you look at that performance, it was so dominating in all facets of the game that you can now say that this is, without a doubt, the number 2 team in the country right now because they're playing like that. So I think it's a very easy conversation to where you move them now. The next question is, who do you stick in at 3?
Probably Alabama at 3, right?
I think you keep Alabama at 3.
Who's at 4 is really interesting.
Now, Nicole, this is where your guys are there.
My Bearcats should be there.
Your Bearcats are going to be there.
They should be there.
I think they'll be there.
I think this is the week they get in.
Yes.
Because there's no downside to putting them in.
No downside.
Yeah.
Because if Michigan wins,
right, then they'll vault them, and then you'll figure out what to do with Ohio State.
It's going to play itself out, and the Big 12 race is still interesting.
Okay, but so here's where it's interesting. Well, go ahead, finish your thought.
My point is that there are teams that can jump Cincinnati later.
Okay.
But so you might as well just put them there now.
Might as well put them there.
Yes.
Because you've already set the precedent in year 1 that just because you're in the top 4 going into the final week,
you can do whatever.
Doesn't mean you remain in the top 4.
You can do whatever.
So put them in there. I mean, but there are some interesting teams now. You mentioned you were at Senior Day at Notre Dame. They look pretty good. Now, Cincinnati stands in their way, right? And I think Cincinnati should stand in their way the whole time because to me, there's nothing Notre Dame can do. I mean, they're playing Stanford, who is, to use your phrase, no good.
And no championship game.
And no championship game.
Right,
which they do to themselves, and that's fine. I understand.
Where they want to be.
They want to be an independent, but the extra data point would help.
Yeah.
And there aren't great wins, although the Wisconsin win looks better and better. But Cincinnati beat them thoroughly on their own field.
No doubt.
Oklahoma State becomes interesting.
Yes.
Right? I mean, Oklahoma State, man, that is a big-time defense. And you could see a scenario where they end up jumping Cincinnati.
Yeah. If they win out, sure. Like, this is what we can officially write off the ACC.
Yes.
We can officially write off the Pac-12.
Yes.
But everyone who got all excited about Oklahoma losing a couple weeks ago kind of forgot, about Oklahoma State.
Are you?
Also all of Cincinnati, the entire city. The entire city. Because they do need help, and things are starting to part for them. But you still have a really good Oklahoma State team. Again, that defense is one of the best in the country. And they have an opportunity here against Oklahoma. So they're both like, they'll both be like borderline, top 12, these games that they're going to play.
Yes.
If one of them comes out with one loss, a one-loss Big 12 team is getting in. So that's an issue for a Cincinnati, a Notre Dame, a Michigan or Ohio State or however that shakes out. Like the teams that are lurking want to be rooting for a 2-loss Big 12 champ.
I'd agree. I think this Oklahoma State team is in a pretty good spot.
Yeah.
Be where they need to be, but this is going to be the week for Cincinnati. This week will be about Cincinnati sliding into that 4th spot, I do believe.
Unless they put Michigan ahead of them. Because they have been doing weird things with Michigan because they think they're a very
think they're really good. And by the way,
and they are very good.
By the way, and
they're
again,
very
you
good.
can say whether Michigan should have been ahead of Michigan State or not, and I understand they played in the field, whatever. But Michigan is clearly now the better team. And that's what the committee was saying all along. They are the better team right now. They were not the better team when they played on the field.
And they were the better team for most of the game.
They were.
Just not the outcome.
They were, yeah.
So again, they could do this. They really like Michigan.
Yes,
clearly do.
With good reason.
Yes, there's lots to like. We're going to talk about that. But just don't do that to Cincinnati. You could, that will play itself out. They're playing Ohio State. You could have 2 versus 5. You don't need to do this. Just put the group of 5 team in.
So look, is it sympathy that they would put him in at 4, or is it the right thing that they should put him in at 4?
It's the right thing.
Okay.
They're undefeated. They have a win over, Notre Dame's going to be 6th? A win. That's one of the best wins in the whole country.
And as we have talked about often, every time that game comes up, it was no fluke.
No,
they were the better team substantially.
That game was over at halftime.
Yeah.
Yep.
That game was over at halftime.
Michigan's win over Maryland set up what is certain to be a top 10 clash between the Wolverines and Ohio State Saturday on Fox. Will be the 6th time those two have met in Ann Arbor, with both in the top 10 over the last 45 years. Wolverines have largely had their way, with the notable exception of 2 years ago, which was, of course, an Ohio State rout. So let's get into Michigan first. How good is this team?
I think this team is really good, and it's really balanced. It's really what we've learned about this team. Defensively, they've continued to get better. They have 2 elite pass rushers on that side of the ball, as you mentioned earlier, and they're just playing with such confidence. Then you think about what they're doing offensively. This is a good team and probably will be Ohio State's biggest test, particularly on the defensive side.
Yeah, I agree. I think they will, and they're balanced. It's all the things that we talk about why the selection committee likes them so much, right? Like, they really are balanced. We've seen them win games a lot of different ways. They have grinded out games that we haven't seen them win in other years. I haven't covered, I'll be at this game, and I haven't covered the game since the JT Barrett spot game in 2016, and that was the closest, obviously, that Michigan has come in the Harbaugh era. But you've got to feel like this is the chance, right? Like, this is his best team. The defense is going to be able to do something that not a lot of defenses have done to C.J. Stroud. You've got to feel pretty good about your game wreckers trying to wreck the game. Nobody else has those guys, right? Like, Aiden Hutchinson is one of the best individual defensive players in the country. So, absolutely, it will be the biggest test that Ohio State's faced.
Yeah, I think you think about what Ohio State has been able to do to this point. And, you question whether or not they're going to be able to spread the ball around the way they did last week. And Michigan will have a lot to do with that. And I think when you think about C.J. Stroud's comments, right, I felt like I was chilling back there.
Yeah.
He will not.
No, he won't be chilling. It's interesting, Howard. I always think back to what we thought on the preseason tour. Mm-hmm. And one of the discussions that we had when we came out of Ann Arbor was that they didn't really have anybody where you sit and you say, what are we going to do about that guy, right? And I still think that's somewhat true on offense. I don't think there's anyone who you say, how in the world are we going to stop him? Now, Hassan Haskins, when he gets going, is really good. And I think you could take the backfield in general, and now you put Donovan Edwards in there, and if Blake Corum is healthy this week, like, they got a lot of guys that you got to worry about.
Right.
So I'm not sure that that's totally accurate, but where it's completely inaccurate is defense, all right? Like, now you look at Aiden Hutchinson and Ojabo, and maybe, it wasn't a fully padded practice, and we didn't get to see it in the same way that we normally would to judge it. But those are guys you look at and you say, what in the world are we going to do about them? Right. And so, and when you think about, like, kind of how can you disrupt what Ohio State does so well, it's exactly what you guys are talking about. It's putting pressure on C.J. Stroud. It's not letting it get to the wide receivers.
Right. So you start to think about formations that they want to run when they put 3 receivers on the field, and maybe they don't have that backfield and it's 5 offensive linemen. You may have a back there that's trying to help out and protection-wise. The ball's got to come out quick. It has to come out quick this week. And if he doesn't pre-snap understand where he wants to go with it, that's where there'll be some struggles for them offensively. Michigan's going to make some plays on the defensive side. They're going to make it tough for them, but it's going to be who's able to really weather the storm. Clinksdale, the defensive, the pass coordinator for them, Michigan has done really a good job of really having that secondary play at such a high level. And they're going to be challenged this week, but it's going to be up to that front 7 to be able to get pressure, so the quarterback has to make quick decisions.
Yeah, this is where you love to see strength versus strength, because we were talking all last week about how it was a brutal matchup for Michigan State's defense, right? It was all the things that they struggled the most with and all the things Ohio State was the best at. Well, here you get this is what we're great at, and this is what we're great at, and they're just going to go like this. And that's what I think we all love. And that's why, I've been so excited that, hopefully both of these teams are going to continue to play well heading into this, because you want to see that. And that's what this game is supposed to be. Offensively, though, I'm going to be really interested because, even this past week against Maryland, you mentioned Donovan Edwards, they're doing some different stuff. They're throwing some more things for Ohio State to have to think about. So maybe they got some more tricks up their sleeve. I mean, maybe they're going to try some things that we haven't seen them do, because we have seen them win a lot of games in a lot of different ways.
And that's the key. They've had different players step up in key moments this entire season. Yeah. It hasn't been, Quorum had been really getting it going, right? Haskins had been getting, so you could say that those 2 guys had been consistently in whichever game being the lead player offensively. But we watched the quarterback take humongous steps in this last month. We've seen different wide receivers, tight ends step up. There's a lot Ohio State needs to think about, and where they're going to, if they feel like they need to double cover anyone, it'll be interesting to see. This is going to be, I think, a really good, not just on the field, but a real good coaching matchup as well, because they're going to have to put these players in the best position they can.
Am I wrong to look at it this way, Howard? I mean, to me, the greatest strength of any one unit in this game is still Ohio State's offense. I mean, when it gets going, it's amazing. But is the biggest weakness, if you were to take offense, defense, is the biggest weakness still Ohio State's defense?
As it's configured right now.
Feels like it, right? I mean, again, played great last week.
So here's what I would say, right? If they know where the quarterback is going to be, the offense is in trouble. I mean, so Ohio State knowing where the quarterback is going to be in that game, they know where he's going to drop. If it's 5-step drop, 3-step, they know where they need to get to. That's an advantage for Ohio State, because then they can get pressure. They know that the quarterback's not going to get outside. And I know JJ came in and made some plays and got some valuable reps in this game. They're going to need him in this game. They'll need him not to be the superstar, but they'll need a change of pace to keep this defense off pace.
I want to pose a question to you, Nicole, that I know Michigan fans don't really want to ponder right now. But were Michigan to lose this game, how do we judge this season? I mean, it was a year that began with Jim Harbaugh on the hot seat. He restructured his contract. He completely overhauled his staff. He questioned everything they were doing, soup to nuts, as they say, and came back with a really different approach, which has been, by most measures, a rousing success. However, we know he's never beaten Ohio State. They've lost 15 of 16 as a program. They lost to Michigan State as well. Do they need to win this game for this year to be a success?
I think you would always say yes to that if you're a Michigan fan, right? This is the game, it's the one that matters. But I think that everyone has learned enough this season. I mean, there was a little bit of that freak out after losing to Michigan State, that Jim Harbaugh's teams, can't win the big one, which again, they've beaten Michigan State before, they've beaten Notre Dame. But this season, they have won a lot of tough games. They've gone on the road against ranked teams and won games. They've come back in games. They've won games in different ways. So I think collectively, the Michigan fan base understands that this is a really good team, that this isn't smoke and mirrors, that they're building and what they're doing here. But I think, again, it's really hard when you're measured up against a program that only 3 or 4 programs are operating at a certain level. and they're in your division, they block your path to the Big Ten championship game and the playoff every single year, and you can't beat them. And in a different era of Michigan or in Ohio State, Jim Harbaugh probably wins a couple, right? Like if it's not Ohio State, like all the way up here, and they're more like a normal, good Ohio State team. So I don't know. I think the expectation is still, Michigan fans getting cautiously optimistic, as they often do. And then they get terrified when they watch things like Ohio State and what they did last week to Michigan State. But I would hope that people would still realize, like, the program took steps this season, even if you lose to your rivals. But again, fan is short for fanatic. Not everything is rational. I don't know if that answers the question.
I know it's the answer is yes, if you're a fan. I mean, just look what you said. But
the answer is yes, they have to win for it to be a success.
Yes, they have to win for it to be a success. For it to be a success. But I don't feel that way. I mean, I walked away this summer saying, this feels different.
Yeah.
I've watched them play this year. It feels different. You talked about coming from behind in games, playing, first quarter the same way you're playing the fourth quarter. If you had some struggles, everything just didn't fall apart. They weren't giving games away.
Right.
It feels different. And you talk about taking those steps.
They could 11 wins. They could be an 11-win team, and people would be saying it wasn't a success. Like that would. I get why you would make that argument, but it would still be.
I know.
Tough.
I guess I'm of two minds on this, and the rational side of me says what you guys are saying. I mean, they're clearly better, right?
Yeah.
And then they have young players who are really good, right? I mean, McCarthy's going to be really good, and Edwards and Anthony kind of comes out of nowhere as one of the lower-rated players in your recruiting class. I mean, so not only are they good, but I mean, it's not like it's just with a bunch of fifth-year seniors or anything like that. But then there's a part of me that says it's Michigan, and they've won more Big Ten championships than any school, and they're in the longest drought in school history, and they have every advantage. I mean, there's no reason that they shouldn't be able to. There's nothing standing in their way other than a historically great Ohio State program. But I mean, I guess I just can't. There's a part of me that feels like they're clearly really good, and there's a part of me that feels like you just can't make excuses for Michigan. And again, look, I do think an 8 or 12 team playoff solves all this.
It does.
Because they're certainly at a level where they'd get in.
Let me ask you.
They would have gotten in a few times.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nicole, you're younger than both of us.
Am I?
Yeah, you are. But I wonder if you're like a 20-something. How do you view the Michigan program?
I hear you.
Right?
We view them through the lens of what we saw.
Yeah. So how do you view it as a younger Michigan fan when you know that, hey, you have to agree that Ohio State was probably better when they've been winning. But they're clearly getting better. And I think that's the unfortunate thing for the program, or when we look at a blue blood like this, because they're not the only ones that are suffering through this. Nebraska's suffering through it. Oklahoma's suffering through it. And not Texas is having to deal with it.
Oklahoma's been to the playoff.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, Michigan's never in the Big Ten championship game. There are 7 schools who've been in the Big Ten championship game. They've never been to it.
They've never been there.
And they're Michigan.
Yes, and that's the thing. But they're Michigan because of what we know that Michigan has been.
Right. I hear you. I mean, we could go. This could be an hour. This could be a whole hour.
Yeah. But I think in a different era, like this is a historically great stretch for the Ohio State program. So
I hear
it's
you.
just really hard when that's
Penn
the team
State
that
got
you miss.
past them one time. What a weekend for Purdue basketball, looking like a national championship contender, winning the Hall of Fame tip-off tourney in Connecticut. Beat North Carolina Saturday, then rallied from 11 down in the second half to top number 5 Villanova yesterday. Shot 53% from the field, nearly 44% from 3, and kind of used their depth to wear down the Wildcats. They are 5-0 on the season. We're joined by our friend Sean Morris, Big Ten Network basketball analyst from day one. And Sean, let's start here with this Boilermaker team. It just feels like they can beat you in so many ways. They are really a complete team.
Well, Dave, they shoot the ball extremely well. They're north of 50% from the floor, north of 40 from three-point range, 75% from the line. And they can run so many bodies at you. I mean, they beat 2 teams in North Carolina and Villanova. We both know they like to push the pace. They're down 11 in the second half, and they were able to come all the way back. They had double-digit possessions where they scored on every possession. I think it was 12 or 13 consecutive field goals that they made, able to climb all the way back from that ball game. They were able to get up and down against teams that really want to play at that pace. And the thing that stuck out to me, other than the fact that they made a lot of shots, they were able to get combinations inside with Williams and Edey, really impressive. But how about the fact that you've got Ivey and Stefanovic in those two games against two blue bloods, Villanova and UNC, they combined for 27 assists, 5 turnovers in a game that was up and down, up and down. And I think another stat that hopped out at me, and especially in that Villanova game, Dave, was this. This is a team in Villanova. They weren't as deep. Purdue took advantage of that, and I think it was reflected in something on the offensive end for the Wildcats. This was a team in Villanova that came in shooting 87% from the line as a team. They go 9 of 17. There's no question that the depth of Purdue wore them down because those foul shots were short, and Purdue was able to just kind of assert their will in that last 7 or 8 minutes. Really, really impressive on both ends of the floor. They shot the ball extremely well. They've taken care of the ball very well, and so incredibly unselfish. And the fact that you have 9 guys and you haven't really incorporated Gillis or Newman into that rotation yet. So this is a team that has a ton of depth that they can throw at people. Those are 2 really high-quality wins in a neutral site. Very, very impressive.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, to me, I think what's amazing is the number of different guys who can beat you. I mean, Isaiah Thompson came up with some huge shots down the stretch. You mentioned Mason Gillis is now back from his suspension. I mean, how about you're bringing Travion Williams off the bench? Zach Edey's unbelievable. The guy's shooting 73%, right? And Williams seems to have embraced his role. Caleb First has been a revelation as a freshman. And so that, to me, is what stands out is, I mean, you can afford for Jaden Ivey, for instance, to have an off day. There's so many different ways that this team can beat you. And as we know, I mean, kind of to your point, right, and these were 2 teams maybe of similar mindsets who they played this weekend, who like to go with tempo and try to, run at you a little bit. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, I have no doubt that when someone really tries to grind it out with them, the result will be in Purdue's favor as well, because that's what they're built for.
Right. And you mentioned Thompson, and he shot the ball very, very well yesterday. How about the job he did defensively on Gillespie? I mean, I thought he was just fantastic on that end of the floor. And as you came into this season, you were wondering, okay, that guard position with Isaiah Thompson and Eric Hunter, what were they going to get? Well, so far they've gotten outstanding production, especially on the defensive end of the floor. And I think the unselfishness with which this team plays on the defensive end, the communication, especially for this early in the season, I thought has been absolutely stellar. And it also shows up on the offensive end. Yes, the assist-to-turnover ratio kind of bears it out. But you watch how hard this team cuts. They cut extremely hard. And the first cutter essentially knows he's giving himself up. He's not going to be the primary option. It's going to be someone trailing around behind him. And to have that level of buy-in from guys from 1 through 9, big, medium, small, whatever you want to put out there, they all play extremely hard. They play extremely unselfishly on both ends of the floor. And I think it's reflecting the fact that they have 2 of the best, albeit early in the season, 2 of the best non-conference wins, not just from the Big Ten, but national.
All right, Sean, if we're going to drink the truth serum, though, I think the truth is it has not been a great start to the season for the Big Ten, really, outside of Purdue. So let's run through a few of these other teams. A new AP poll came out today. There's only 3 Big Ten teams in the top 25. One of them, the Michigan Wolverines, have really fallen here. They have lost to Seton Hall, and then last night against Arizona. I mean, they didn't just get beaten. They really kind of got beaten up. So what's going on with what, again, is a young Michigan team, but one that seemed certainly last night, to me, really out of sorts?
And I would agree with that. I think this is a team that, people want to push the panic button, but a lot of young guys that they're trying to incorporate. And I think last night, their shooting woes continued. I think they were 1 of 14 from 3. They were really collapsing where the Wildcats in on Dickinson and forcing him to give it up. They just missed some shots, and that's been a problem for them. They're under 30% from three-point range in the early part of this season as a team. They struggled from the floor a little bit and the line. But I think the thing that is for Michigan right now, especially after that Arizona game, shots are going to start to fall. I mean, what's that saying that, water finds its level? Defensively, I think is one thing they're going to probably address a little bit sooner, because you mentioned the fact that they got beaten up, clearly reflected in the fact Arizona had 54 points in the paint. Okay, this is a team that was able to assert their will. You knew they were going to run guys at Dickinson, and they did. And they just weren't able to make shots. That was a problem for them versus Seton Hall as well. But I think they'll want to tighten up on the defensive end of the floor. And I think that's where their youth has really kind of shown itself here in the early going. They're going to get better. This is going to be a team that is certainly going to be in the hunt for the Big Ten title, both regular season and the tournament title. But right now, they're not making shots, and I think it's kind of carried over to the defensive end of the floor, witnessed by the fact that Arizona was kind of able to assert their will and get in the lane and score. They'll start to make shots, but defensively, I think is where they're going to start to address, some of that youth, especially here in the early going.
Yeah, I'm with you. This is a team that was so good. The interior defense was so good last year. They were so hard to score on inside, and obviously quite the opposite in that game last night. Let's talk a little bit about Maryland. They were a top 20 team at the beginning of the year. They lost to George Mason, who's going to be a very good mid-major this year, but then got taken to the wire against Hofstra. I mean, needed to rally in the last minute and a half to beat the Pride. So what do we make of a Maryland team that's had some significant roster turnover?
Yeah, I think that's the key right there. And you've got guys that are starting to try to kind of find their roles. And one guy who I think has maybe put too much pressure on himself right now here in the early going is Eric Ayala. I really like Ayala as a player, but I think he's been forced, at least in his own mind, to take on a greater role offensively. He's forced some shots. It's reflected in his field goal percentage. And this is a team in Maryland, they struggled shooting the ball here early as well. They're under 30% from three. They will get better. There's a lot to like about this team. You want to talk about a team that can get after you defensively. They have a ton of guys in that 6'6" to 6'9" range that can get up and down the floor, but they have struggled shooting the ball. And I think, Eric Ayala has kind of been a really nice complementary player. I think he has a chance to have a tremendous year. He just needs to relax a little bit, because you can tell as you watch him play, he's kind of pressing because he understands he has a lot of guys that weren't there a year ago. Fats Russell's going to be a nice player, but he's a transfer in. They're trying to incorporate a bunch of moving pieces. And you mentioned George Mason. That was not a fluke. George Mason is a very good team. I think the fact that they had to kind of come back against Hofstra really got their attention. They go on the road now to a tournament, playing a pretty good Richmond team that's very, very experienced. So I think this is a team as well that's going to get better as the year goes on. But everyone talks about, they plug in place with all these transfers. Well, it's still a team game. This is not a video game. You have to incorporate guys and put them in positions and understand where they want to get the ball, how they want to play. And I think Eric Ayala right now has really moved up in terms of what his level of expectation is. And I think it's shown here early on. He'll calm down, and he's going to have a really good year for them.
Yeah, and sometimes it does just come down to making shots, as you said, and particularly from three. They've really struggled there. One more team I want to ask you about, Illinois. We saw what happened to them against Marquette. Of course, this was without Kofi Cockburn. So now he comes back tonight. They got a really big game against Cincinnati. It'll be the first time we have seen them whole this year. And you're adding in arguably one of the top handful of players in the country. What do you make of kind of where the Illini are and what it'll mean for Kofi Cockburn to return tonight?
Well, to get a guy back that's going to shoot, close to 70% can do nothing but help you. He's also a rim protector with how they want to play defensively. And I think, in his absence, look, with Carbello, he's going to be outstanding at times. And he showed a little bit of inexperience in that Marquette game. He was really trying to force things. If Kofi Cockburn is in that ball game, you're going to throw the ball to him and play through him. He wasn't there, and I think Carbello tried to take on a little bit too much, reflecting the fact he had some pretty poor decisions that led to runouts the other way. With how this team plays defensively, they're always going to have a chance. They've got some guys that can get up and down the floor. Keep an eye on Coleman Hawkins. I think the ceiling on that guy continues to rise. They're going to be fine. But now you're going to have to go into this ballgame against a very well-coached Cincinnati team that can run different bodies at Cockburn. He needs to make sure he doesn't try to force too many things. They're going to be fine. They just need to play at that pace, but a little bit more under control, especially Carbello.
Yeah, I'm with you. Carbello, down the stretch against Marquette, it was ugly, frankly. Did not play well. Sean, great stuff. As always, really appreciate your time and look forward to going through this season with you again.
Look forward to it. It's a simple game, Dave, or they wouldn't let me near it.
Here's what it comes down to in the Big Ten West. If Wisconsin wins, they are headed to Indianapolis. If Wisconsin loses and Iowa wins, Iowa is headed to Indianapolis. And were they both to lose, there's still a shot Minnesota could get there, but Gophers need some help from Purdue as well. It is likely a two-team race, barring some craziness. And on a day where Wisconsin was really pushed to the brink by Nebraska, who once again played just well enough to lose a close game against an elite team. Wisconsin was probably saved by Braylon Allen. He was fabulous. Defense wasn't great.
Yeah, it's happened. But I think one of the things that happens when you look at them from an offensive standpoint, they're finally getting back to really who they have been in previous years. And Allen has been a big part of that. They were running the ball, had some success running it early, but then they ran into whatever it was the offensive line was going through. But they clearly have it figured out right now.
Yeah, 7 straight 100-yard rushing games. I mean, he's terrific. He was averaging over a first down per carry in this game, which poor Nebraska. They feel like they always get the best of the Wisconsin running backs.
What a surprise.
Right.
Yeah.
Nebraska team giving up more than 200 yards to Wisconsin running back.
Yeah. They have done
seen
that before.
Yes. Now he's been phenomenal. No question about it. Now, I do worry a bit if I'm a Wisconsin fan about the defense, right? I mean, they gave up more than twice the yardage they were averaging allowing per game in this one. I mean, they were in the low 200s, and Nebraska went for 452 yards. Now, again, like, it's a broken record, right? We know Nebraska's good, and Nebraska has some weapons, and Samori Toure is outstanding, and look, Martinez is...
When he's on,
he's really good. Obviously, turnovers are an issue.
He can stress your team.
But do you read anything into Wisconsin's defense struggling beyond that?
Outside of the fact that when you have a quarterback of Martinez's ability, right? And I've been harping on this because I think that when you have a special person under center that can do it with his arm and his legs and is very good with ball handling, that's going to give – I don't care how good your defense is. All you have to do is void a lane. All you have to do is get too far up the field, and they can make you pay. So I don't read too much into it, but they need – can they have a game off? I mean, really?
Yeah.
If any team could afford to have they've been good so much of the year that –
It's kept them in so many games.
Right.
It's just been an opportunity.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm with Howard. I think I put this more on what Adrian Martinez does to defenses.
Okay, what about Iowa? Pulled away late against Illinois. Thoughts on the Hawkeyes?
Yeah, I mean, they're who we think they are, too. I mean, that's what's really interesting, I think, about the way that the West race is shaking up, is that it's the teams that, we always talk about having these identities. It took Wisconsin a little while to form it, but, Iowa's doing Iowa things and taking care of business. And I think that, for people who've kind of maybe stopped watching them ever since they fell from that number 2 perch, maybe don't realize the different things that they're doing week to week and the ways that they're doing it. It's always going to be a little bit of a struggle offensively, but the defense is still incredibly fun to watch.
Yeah, they were able to get a 100-yard rusher.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind of
second time in 3 games they have run the ball reasonably well.
So to be able to get Goodson going again is a big part of who they've been when they've had success.
Right.
When his numbers are not great, this team isn't winning football games.
The last 5 games, they've scored 91 points.
Yeah.
There's no reason in the world that Nebraska can't beat them on Friday, right? I mean, but again.
There are a lot of reasons.
Yeah.